All right, we're going to get started just with a couple housekeeping things first. So, as people are joining in, welcome. My name is Erin Edwards. I'm so happy to welcome you to our continuing education series, Joining Forces, Empowering Voices, a collaborative approach to supporting adults using high-tech AAC. Through this series, you'll find that our team, are very passionate about building greater collaboration between BCBAs and SLPs. So all of our webinars will offer CEUs for both professions. We're also very invested in improving services for adults with disabilities. So a lot of the examples and discussions in our presentations will focus on adults, but many of the interventions and techniques can be applied to children as well. And finally, we are passionate about the potential of high-tech AAC. So all of our webinars will include information on that type of communication. Can you advance, Julie? Thank you. This CEU series is brought to you through the generosity of the Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust. We are very grateful for their support and for this opportunity to bring you some amazing speakers over the next year. We hope this makes a difference in your practice as a professional, and in turn makes a difference in the lives of the people you support. So with some important CEU information, I'll put this website and the email in the chat, and you'll also receive them in a follow-up email from the event tomorrow. A couple important points to remember with the CEUs. They are up on our learning management system website, but do not take the quiz or finish the evaluation before the event tonight has concluded, or the system will not count your CEUs and you will not get the credits that you want. So wait until we're all finished and logged off here. To get your CEUs, you'll need to create a profile and log in and password to our learning management system before you can access the quiz and the evaluation. So there's a step-by-step walkthrough of how to do this on the website. Right there, and I'll also put that in the chat, and it's under the Earning CEUs tab. So it takes a minute. You have to get an email and verify it, but you only have to do it one time for our entire series, and we have 11 more amazing speakers following this webinar throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss out. And finally, if you have any technical questions or issues completing the post work to help you get your CEUs, please use that email. Again, I'll drop it in the chat too, but use that email to let us know, and we will help you figure it out. So let me introduce our speakers for tonight so we can get right into this. Julia Carnazos is an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Penn State University. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in speech-language pathology, and she provides clinical education and supervision in augmentative and alternative communication at the Penn State Speech, Language, and Hearing Clinic at University Park. Julia is interested in supporting interdisciplinary teams through comprehensive AAC assessments that improve intervention outcomes for individuals with complex communication needs. And Julia is joined by Dawn Sowers. Dawn is an SLP with over 25 years experience in AAC across the lifespan and an assistant research professor in Penn State's Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders focused on AAC research and clinical outreach. In her work with the RERC on AAC, Dawn is involved in eye tracking projects, looking at visual attention patterns to AAC displays, and the development of a communication partner training tool. She also enjoys being a clinical educator in the department's AAC clinic and uses her experiences to inform pre-service AAC clinical education research and support in-service teams in best practice AAC service delivery through the Heinz Family Endowment for Children's Communicative Competence. That was a big one, Dawn. She is one of the collaborators for our series here of Empowering Voices, Joining Forces, sponsored by the Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust, which focuses on AAC service delivery as a team effort for adults with autism. So thank you so much, Julie and Dawn, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Erin. We're really excited to be here and to talk about this important topic. We've got our disclosures here. And we'll get going with AAC Considerations for Adults with Autism. Thanks everyone for joining us. So our objectives tonight will include introducing the basic components of AAC assessment based on the participation model. We're going to discuss a checklist and strategies to support teams through each assessment component. And then we'll discuss the clinical and community-based implications for adults with ASD. So first, let's start with a definition of augmentative and alternative communication. AAC is the field of or area of clinical, educational, and research practice that's focused on improving the communication skills of individuals with little or no functional speech or writing through both aided and unaided modes of communication. Yeah, and we want to make sure that we are thinking about who needs augmentative and alternative communication. It's people who are unable to meet their daily communication needs through speech because of developmental disabilities, acquired disabilities, progressive neurological disabilities, and temporary conditions. And we call anyone who needs AAC people with complex communication needs.
And there's a webinar as part of this series that posted in August that talks a lot about just a more introductory information to AAC and to the series. So make sure to check that out, and you can earn CEUs for that too if you want a little bit more knowledge about the introduction to AAC. Great.
So people with complex communication needs includes people who are at risk for speech development because of developmental disabilities, people who have some speech, but not enough to meet all of their daily communication needs. And also people who have speech that's functional in some contexts, but not all of them, or with some communication partners, but not all of them. So for that reason, people with complex communication needs includes people with ASD. We know that at least 30% of children with ASD have limited or no speech. We're getting oriented with the page turning in the Zoom. And without functional language and communication, adults with ASD are at risk for negative outcomes across education, employment, community and independent living, participation, and overall quality of life.
So it's really important to consider those individuals who have speech in some contexts or can get their needs met in some, but not others, so that they do have that quality of life in all of these areas to their full potential.
Right, right. So who provides an AAC assessment? It's a team. So many people with ASD experience difficulties outside of language and communication. So for example, 30% of individuals with ASD demonstrate intellectual impairments. Hearing, vision, and sensory processing impairments are more prevalent in individuals with ASD. And even though motor impairments isn't considered a core component of ASD, many individuals with ASD do have gross and fine motor difficulties. And that complexity of concomitant cognitive, sensory, perceptual, and motor impairments requires interdisciplinary professional practice, or IPP, to meet their needs.
Absolutely.
We know this. AAC assessments are complex. We're just making, okay. So the participation model provides a really great framework for AAC assessment and intervention that helps us identify communication needs across contexts. It helps assess skills across domains, and then it helps identify the partner interaction strategies that support communication, as well as the environmental barriers that impede it. Thanks. So Carney's Awesome Light developed a checklist to support interdisciplinary teams through AAC assessment that's based on the participation model. This checklist was developed for school teams, but checklists are used to support users through task completion or through team briefings across disciplines and professions. They were originally introduced in aviation to reduce errors in B-17 flight, and in medicine to reduce errors and improve adherence to practice guidelines in ICUs and surgery. And we're going to use the checklist to introduce the basic components of AAC assessment based on that participation model, and then provide strategies for completing each one. So let's get into it with AAC assessment. This is the checklist, and I'll make sure that that we provide a copy for you after the webinar. It has 3 pause points for communication needs, communication skills, and then the partner and environments. And what we found, or what I found in my study, is that often the critical components of an AAC assessment are left out. And just in the same way that you don't want to like forget to put the wheels down on a plane, you don't want to miss a vision in your AAC assessment. So in order to not crash this AAC assessment plane, we're going to use the checklist to make sure that the critical components are included.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because I think people today tend to just see an app and grab it and then try to use it with an individual. And really that often causes more problems than good. And then the person is determined to not benefit from AAC, or it gets abandoned and all that money has been spent already. And so really by taking the time to work through the checklist before you make that decision, it's going to be really useful. So I love that it kind of breaks everything down so that anyone on the team can look at this and have a direction of where to go, not just any one particular professional.
Right. And in a study that compared the use of this checklist to something like this, or not something, but the SET framework, we found that, teams without the checklist tended to just kind of do a quick receptive language assessment, symbol assessment, and then straight to device recommendations and trials. And this gave teams more information to work with.
Yeah. So let's break it down.
Yeah. We'll start with the communication needs. So when we assess communication needs, we're trying to determine the requirements for an AAC system, and the unmet communication needs are going to help us determine the context and skills that are priorities for intervention. So the purpose of that communication needs assessment is really to determine the type of input the person with complex communication needs needs to understand, whether that's spoken, written, or both. Determine with whom, when, where, why, about what, and how the person with complex communication needs to communicate. We want to describe communication patterns and identify unmet communication needs. So are they initiating communication? Are they responding? What does that look like? And then we review those unmet communication needs and then identify those priorities for intervention. So some specific strategies are always helpful for completing a communication needs assessment. So there's 2 to highlight tonight. First, an interview. So an interview would be looking at maybe asking what helps the person understand the language and communication around them. And I might chase that question with something like, for example, when you talk to this person, do you support your speech with gestures like pointing, signs, or even symbols, pictures, or text? You're trying to figure out with whom the person's communicating across context. So not just at home or in the community placement or community setting, but at work and all the other places. So with whom, when and where does the person communicate? What does this person talk about? So this is where you really get to know their interests and interests in the vocabulary they might need within a specific context. What does communication with this person look like? And that question usually helps you identify where communication breakdowns are. And then lastly, you're asking, what are your priorities for assessment and intervention?
I think it's really important with the interview process too, to interview multiple people. And
Yes.
interview sounds like such a formal word, but it's not, doesn't have to be that formal. It can just be a conversation with different touch point people that, are involved in that person's life at different levels. And it might also include kind of who do they want to communicate with that they're not currently able to, not just who they are having successful communication with.
Yeah.
Or context.
Yeah, definitely. So interviews is a great place to start. An interview is a great place to start. Another way to gather the information you need in a communication needs assessment is through ecological inventories. These are systematic observations where you are observing the person with complex communication needs across environments and considering both the communication obligations and opportunities compared to peers without disabilities. So I like that compared to peers without disabilities part of it, because you can consider in a work setting, for example, the communication obligations and opportunities for the person versus their peers while they work, for example, the cash register. So it's like, okay, let me watch someone without disabilities interact. It's not, the communication in this context isn't limited to just the money exchange. It's the greeting that comes before it. It's the
Clarifying questions, that's all
Yeah.
the things.
yeah, it's asking for your name to write on the coffee cup. Like there's a lot happening, and observing a peer through it can really give you a solid idea of what the communication needs are for that context.
Kind of like a task analysis is what I hear
Totally.
you saying, like
Yeah.
for the BCBAs, it's kind of like really going through, which I think BCBAs are really strong in.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times speech therapists can forget about this part of being really systematic and thinking about the different contexts and going and observing or getting a good sense. And that's whether that's a hockey game
Mhm.
or a cash register or, anything, like where are the communication points?
Right. Oh, okay. Good. So then after you've assessed your communication needs, or maybe as you go, you're going to assess communication skills. And this is looking at someone's skills across domains, including their sensory perceptual skills, motor skills, receptive and receptive language, expressive communication, symbol representation, literacy, and then cognitive organization as well. So here's that middle section of our checklist. And the strategies for completing this type of assessment. Now, this is really where you have to pull on your team because no one knows it all. And in the same way that a speech therapist doesn't know ophthalmological terminology
Or how to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to make sure that we're including the specific constellation of professionals that the individual needs.
So vision assessment sounds, pretty commonplace. Like, of course I would do that, but often we don't really think about it all that much because, essentially AAC is a visual graphic system. So vision is quite a key component of that. So we always, want to look at the acuity, how well they can see close up, far away, as well as any ocular motor issues that, so the movement of the eye that might be affecting the clarity of what they're trying to look at. Because that's really going to impact, how many symbols are on a screen, how much space needs to be in between each symbol, things like that. And I think often we think about those two things, but there's a third piece of vision that we really want to think about because traditional vision assessments tend to not look at the actual use of functional vision, especially with individuals that may have a brain-based vision disorder, like a visual processing issue. Often that's referred to as cortical visual impairment. And I think current research is showing that a lot of times this is a very underdiagnosed or even underexplored area in individuals with autism. And so, if this interests you at all, or if you have an individual who, everyone says they can see fine and it appears like it's fine, but they just use their vision in, unique ways, it might be something that you want to educate yourself a little bit more about and get a sense of as you're thinking about this visual graphic system that you're trying to introduce. And so we've just actually thrown a few resources up here. As places where if you want to learn more about brain-based visual impairment and cortical visual impairment and how that might apply to this population. So just kind of a public service announcement.
Yeah, and so with vision, you also want to make sure that you're checking hearing. And hearing assessments are helpful for determining appropriate access to spoken input from communication partners. Of course, you can't respond if you can't hear the signal. And also the AAC system output, including selection feedback and voice output. So that really just means, can you hear your own device when you make a selection, or can you hear those little clicks and beeps as you're composing a message? And maybe you need them and maybe you don't, but we want to make sure that that we've checked hearing.
So, yeah, so another piece we want to think about that, again, can be often overlooked in individuals with autism is this idea of motor skills. We know that although motor skills are can be a strength, they also can have some very distinct, like fine motor issues, where key guards and other things, may become helpful. So this is where an OT might become in handy if someone's, seems to be having some issues with their fine motor hand skills, to be able to influence how that device is set up, not only for the use of key guard or not, but also, again, like spatial placement of the symbols, and the sensitivity of the screen. There's lots of changes that can be made to kind of support those fine motor differences they may be having.
Right. Right. And so again, we're thinking about those gestures, hand shapes, the orientation, movement, location, as well as an access for direct selection, and maybe even switch access. So for sure. Okay.
So now we've got the things we often don't think about under our belt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is the one we don't often miss, but there are sometimes adaptations you need to make to get a reliable and valid assessment of receptive language. So we're looking for a receptive language assessment, first of all, is going to be used to determine, make sure my animations are going, the person's understanding of spoken language, including their understanding of specific vocabulary and their understanding of grammar and sentence structure, and also the effect of augmented input on their understanding of spoken language. So that's a big word just to mean like supported speech, but I can test someone's understanding of get your shoes with speech only. I can check their understanding of get your shoes by adding augmented input, which might be like a point or a sign, go get your shoes. So if I say, get your shoes, that's just the understanding of spoken language. If I say, get your shoes, and I point, then I've added something to that. And I want to make sure that I'm checking both, given the likelihood of receptive language deficits in ASD. Okay. So some strategies for completing a receptive language assessment. So most SLPs will be familiar with these standardized receptive language tests. The receptive one word is a vocabulary test where you ask people to point to target words. Like here we have an item, point to tree, and it's just that simple. And what's important to note about using a test like this is that they often need to be adapted. Maybe the person administering it needs to provide some models or additional supports. And if that happens, you can't score them. So don't score them against the norming sample, but instead use them to describe receptive language skills like vocabulary, or in the next example, sentence comprehension. Here's an example from the SELF, or the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals. So here is where you can really you can do an error analysis and see, okay, they're really great on nouns, but they have very few verbs, right? And then if you don't have very many verbs, then building a sentence like noun verb sentence is going to be really difficult. And that might indicate that this person needs instruction in verbs.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think it's really good because I think in school, we typically just learn how to give a standardized test, and no one really talks about how informative and how you can, like you said, do that error analysis, which again, I think the BCBAs would be really handy and like looking some of that, but to just kind of still use some of pieces of an assessment or a certain subtest or something like that, that just kind of give us a little bit more beyond just kind of what our gut is thinking or what we feel like we've observed, but to give them an opportunity, to show what all they know. Because I know we've been surprised at our clinic, what individuals can or can't do, that looks different from what we see. So always informative.
Yeah, and again, you can take that to like answer questions like, do they understand single word vocabulary, or specific sentence structures or prepositions or whatever it is.
But we know these won't work with everybody. So you've got some other strategies to show us, right?
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so in addition to a standardized test, you can, or a non-standardized test, I guess, but in addition to that, you can conduct systematic observations of receptive language performance in daily interactions. Instead of pointing to pictures, you could assess someone's understanding of vocabulary in context, like at work here. So I could look for someone's comprehension of nouns, of course, but also their understanding of pronouns and adjectives, verbs, adverbs, conjunctions, prepositions, interjections. So in my example here, put the iced tea with the lemonade. So I'm looking for prepositions. Grammatical morphemes, do they understand those markers like plural S, the past tense ed ending, articles that indicate space, time, or direction, articles that connect words, phrases, clauses, or sentences. This information ends up being really critical because it could inform how you structure your sentences to the person with ASD. And you can say, okay, like compound sentences are really hard for this person to understand. So I'm gonna adapt my speech and language so that they're getting simple sentences with some space in between to really have that processing time. So we're not doing a receptive language assessment just to do it. We're getting it to inform the AAC system.
Yeah, it definitely.
Partners.
Yeah, well, and it will
Yeah.
form the system as far as like what kind of vocabulary or grammar that's needed, right? Or it may be excessive because that's not something they're,
Right.
look like they're ready to use. So
Exactly. And then I talked about sentence structure, but again, you're looking at those structures. In addition to those systematic observations of receptive language performance, you could design or implement some informal criterion referenced assessment tasks. So point to shoes and have to see if they're able to differentiate between shoe without the plural S or shoes with it, as an example. That can extend to someone's comprehension, again, of parts of speech like prepositions or just the whole sentence here. I'm testing both like content and structure. So put the plant in the whole. I can test that with speech by itself. If that doesn't go great, I might decide to augment my speech with AAC, and I would say put the plant in the whole, but at the same time, point to the pictures on an AAC system or provide symbols to support. And then see the difference, like play out the difference in multiple trials.
yeah, I love how so many of these things can happen just like during daily activities. It's just being that systematic, like having that checklist to remind you like, oh, take note of how this is going, or let me phrase this in a certain way to answer some of these questions.
Yeah. And then you can just circle back and say, wow, they did so much better when I said it and signed it. It doesn't even have to be a symbol. It can be a sign or a gesture. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is important too, when sometimes you have like one communication partner reporting that someone does really well and one communication partner saying, oh, we really struggle. Some of it might just be what they're inherently doing or what the context inherently gives them. Like one person might be really overly gestured or doesn't realize how much support they're giving, and another person doesn't. And so it's just really good to look at these things.
Totally. And that makes it so important to observe them too. Yeah. Great. Okay, so expressive communication. I really want to take a second here to just talk about the difference between expressive language and expressive communication. Language would be someone who's using symbols and words to communicate. Expressive communication can include all those unaided forms of not just unaided, but not symbolic communication forms. So facial expressions can be expressive, gestures,
body language, positioning, body positioning sometimes can be communicated.
I work with a couple of people who kind of like growl at me, and that's like, I mean, not a symbol, but also really clear. So we want to think about expressive communication and not just the language that we're hearing. So these are we're going to try to describe our turn-taking patterns, the initiation and response patterns, the range and frequency of communicative functions and modes, as well as the person's natural speech production and intelligibility, and then the content of those messages. So we'll talk about some of those and some strategies for doing that now. Oops. Okay. So systematic observation of interactions. You're looking for someone's turn taking, if they're initiating or responding to communication from a partner or initiating it. Communicative functions. So how or for what purposes are they communicating? What does that communication look like? And then what's the specific form and content of those messages? And this is where we thought it would be a good time to just discuss the opportunities for collaboration during systematic observations of these interactions. And you know, for example, especially the role of BCBAs in noting the communicative functions and modes. I can kind of turn it over to.
Yeah, I think that, you know, their skill set that they come with really lends itself to assist in that, where the form and content might be more kind of the speech, like, you know, more natural for the speech therapist that may be involved. But what I love about this is all this information, you know, it can be gathered individually and then collaboratively discussed or sent on to the team that's making that final AAC decision. I'm sure, you know, if you're the person trying to do the evaluation, if somebody showed up with all this information in hand, it's going to make your decision making so much better. So yeah, let's open it up and see what others are thinking about some of these things. Or if we have any chat things.
I was going to say, if anybody wants to weigh in on the question, you can either just put your comment in the Q&A. We'll still see it there. Or if you want to raise your hand and unmute, you can ask your question or give your comment.
I'm not sure if I can see the Q&A.
I think
Aaron's.
Yeah.
Yeah, if something comes up, I can see it and let you know for sure.
Can you see me and hear me?
You can. Yes. Thanks.
Yeah. So you know, you're inviting some behavior analysts in our audience, in our panel pool to chime in. So I'll say I think it's important to realize that everyone is board certified, will have formal training in operational definitions, data collection systems. So as you're describing some of the considerations for what AAC mode, assessment, what format to use, I was thinking that these are all great ideas, but what kind of information are we collecting? And I think that's really where we see opportunity for collaboration, where the behavior analyst can work with the speech therapist to identify some robust, efficient, and effective modes of data collection. So we're not making these critical decisions just based on hunch or assumption or best guess, but we're using some kind of empirically derived information to select what really is the best system for a particular person and a particular need, right?
Absolutely. And I don't know, Jonathan, what you're thinking, but just hearing what you said, I'm hopeful like that these 4 or 5 things gives you some of that exactly what I need to be looking for, like what data I could be taking, you know, that how many times are they initiating during this activity? How many times are they responding? What function was that communication for? You know, those types of things to give you give that discussion point of how people can collaborate and what data we are needing for the collection to happen.
I think a more basic idea is just that of collaboration. I can't speak for every behavior analyst. I certainly can't speak for all speech pathologists. I'm not one. But I do think this is one of these activities that has historically been very much siloed. And what you're saying is that is not the right way to approach this. The domain of identifying what mode of communication is best, what it should look like, what the screen should look like, all those details, that's the domain of all of these professionals in a multidisciplinary sense. They should come together and answer these questions, as opposed to, you know, one professional perhaps answering it alone.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's an important message.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully this is kind of opening everybody's eyes as to what pieces are needed, first of all, right, for this strong decision. And then to your point, like that any team member and all team members can, you know, bring that in and maybe I think you were saying that the BCBA may figure out the tool. I probably said that wrong.
You got it.
The tools, like the actual data collection tool or instrument, you know, and kind of make that available, but that everybody can have a say in this. It definitely should not be a siloed, not with these types, not with individuals with autism. There's just so much going on. You have to get everybody involved across their context, across all places to make a good decision.
Yeah, I hear you almost giving a call to action to everyone to either invite that kind of participation or see that as your domain audience, see that as your domain of involvement and contribution to the case.
Yeah, I will just chime in too. Sorry, I turned my video off. One of our participants added, I'm so excited about the potential for more collaboration with speech therapists to allow for greater use of everyone's strengths and a better application and client progress. And yeah, so thank you for making that comment. That is what we're here about as well, and very excited about more of that collaboration happening.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're all excited. So I think one additional point I wanted to make here is that with these communicative functions and modes, you know, we're not just limited to the speech, that kind of your like appropriate communication modes. It's identifying the antecedents and challenging behaviors can be really helpful for like that. What if a challenging behavior is, you know, I guess non-symbolic, but definitely intentional and communicative. So that could be where you start in terms of a priority for interventions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Yes. Collaborate is definitely the message.
Yeah, I can't find my page turner. Okay,
There it goes.
there, thanks. All right. And then, you know, just a note about communicative functions. Light identified for purposes of communication, communicating wants and needs, transferring information. So that's asking and answering questions, commenting, telling stories, expressing social closeness and expressing social etiquette. Unfortunately, many AAC interventions focus on communicating just the wants and needs over other communication goals like social closeness, which are the interactions to develop and maintain relationships. And we want to make sure that that isn't what we're doing, right?
Yeah, we want to make sure all four are being addressed at some level or another, you know, throughout whatever intervention, whatever systems we're creating. And when we're looking through those systematic observations to kind of see what's happening and how they're currently communicating those things.
Exactly. And, you know, again, looking at a ecological inventory, if you're observing if you're observing a peer in a context, you're likely going to find that most of that peer's communication is not wants and needs. It's the transferring information and social closeness. So we want to make sure that we don't have an imbalance there. So if in your systematic observation, you miss a specific skill, it's okay. You can design an informal eliciting context to describe something specific. So maybe in my observation, I didn't see 2-word combinations. I'm going to set up an activity to really get eyes on that. Here I have a picture of a person with ASD and an aide. I think just making some pizza. They would have their AAC system and you would just ask like, what's next? The person with complex communication needs might use the AAC system to have one word like cheese and you would gather that information and say, okay, they're using one word to request the next activity or to comment. What you'd want to do is build a dynamic assessment from that eliciting context, where the communication partner models 2-word combinations and then retests the skill. So the first communicative attempt was cheese by itself. The communication partner extends it and says, let's sprinkle cheese on the pizza. And as she talks, she presses the symbols on the board. She asks what's next again and determines whether or not the person can say pour plus sauce or something. So you can get what you didn't get through informal eliciting contexts. It doesn't have to be pizza. All that to say, we have some important notes about beginning communicators. Beginning communicators, excuse me, are individuals who use non-symbolic modes of communication, gestures, vocalizations, facial expressions, and body language. Their behaviors could be non-intentional or intentional. And this term also includes individuals who are learning to use unaided or aided communication. And pre-symbolic communication is non-symbolic. Pre-symbolic communicators use vocalizations, gestures, facial, I just said this, and body language that may or may not be intentional. And partners respond to pre-symbolic communicators by assigning meaning to their behaviors. And I think about this like in really early development. A baby might be fussy, and the baby is not fussy to tell parent that something is wrong. The baby's fussy just because they're fussy, and the parent comes over and reads that fussiness as discomfort or unhappiness,
hunger.
sadness, hunger, yeah, any of those things. And it's the partner that assigns meaning to the behavior, not the child using like a universal symbol for hungry or fussy or hungry or tired. Okay. Which leads us to some important definitions of pre-intentional and intentional communication. Pre-intentional communicators do not show signs of knowing that their behaviors affect their partners. And intentional communicators do. Weatherby and Present identified 7 characteristics of intentional communication. And as you're looking at these indicators, think about the adults with ASD that you work with who might not demonstrate intentional communication. Yeah. So first, they'll show an eye gaze shift between the goal and the listener. So I'll like look at the cookie, then I'll look back at you, and then, right, so we'll see some eye gaze shifting. I'll be like, I really want that cookie over there, right? A persistence in signaling, I'm going to continue with my signal. Maybe it's reaching and looking at you. I'm going to keep doing it until I get that cookie, for lack of a better example. If that looking at the cookie and looking back at Dawn isn't working for me, I'm going to change the signal. And I'm like, I'm going to add that to that signal there. I might start using the conventional form. I might try to produce cookie with speech or sign it or use a symbol. I'm going to wait for a response from the listener in this interaction. And then if I get the cookie, I'm going to stop because I've met my goal. And with that, I'll also show either satisfaction or frustration. So maybe the end result is I'm not allowed to have the cookie now, and I'll be like there will be it doesn't just go like you'll see that reaction. And so there's an important shift in typical development. It's kind of between that like 6 and 9 months where babies start to recognize that their behaviors affect the behaviors of others. But that's not a guarantee. And we have a lot of adults who don't have intentional communication.
Or they're showing us these signs, but they're not necessarily symbolic. You know, they're not able to understand that the photograph or the symbol on the AAC device means that same thing, but they're showing this really good intentionality. So these are helpful to just kind of determine like where someone may be, especially when, you know, they're more at the earlier stages of communicative behaviors.
Another like kind of classic intentional communicative behavior that I think of is like grabbing someone's hand and leading them to the thing that they're wanting. And to Dawn's point, symbolic communicators do understand and use words, either with signs, speech, pictures, and or text. And those words are communicated symbolically through different means. Okay. And we were talking earlier, those 2 stages really are going to define what you do and what AAC system you ultimately choose. So knowing, does this person understand symbols versus not?
So to that end,
let's assess some symbols. Right. So A symbol assessment is an important step in an AAC assessment, right? We're trying not to crash this plane. Symbol assessments are used to determine the symbols that people with complex communication needs both understand and then can use to communicate. And an important note here, symbols are, what is a symbol? Symbols always represent something else, and that something else is the referent. So I might represent a cookie with a digital photo. I could also do it with a line drawing, a sign, a cookie, or traditional orthography, which would be any like text-based or letter-based system. In addition to the symbols I just discussed, we can also have real objects where maybe I'm making a choice of two here. The apple represents the apple, the donut represents the donut. But real objects are not limited to just like a one-to-one correspondence. Like, do you want the apple or the donut? You might find that someone uses a set of keys to say like, let's go. So anytime someone grabs the keys and stands by the door, that is like the symbol in the household for like, it's time to get going. I work with a gentleman who uses keys to say, let's go. He also just grabs his mom's purse and stands at the door. So
Just
both
waits.
of those, right?
Yeah.
Like, and those real objects are symbols for we're leaving now. Okay.
Or I
would like to leave now.
leave
Yeah.
now. Stop talking,
He's not
Mom, and
driving,
it's time
right.
to leave.
Exactly. Exactly. And another note about symbols for people with ASD, there is evidence that people with developmental disabilities, including ASD, are better at matching digital photos to their reference than they are at matching line drawings, indicating that digital photos might be easier to learn and use. And we want to do anything we can to reduce the learning demands of symbols so that we can just get to communicating with them. They're just the tool. We don't want to spend tons of time teaching symbols that are abstract when we could just, for example, like pick the red car that looks like their red car.
Yeah, that's a really easy switch to put in that makes a huge difference as
Yeah.
far as learning goes. So we never have to teach that symbol now
Right.
because we actually just use the photo that they're familiar with
Yeah.
already.
And it's Google image or like like an actual picture of the person's car, and then
Yeah.
that can be the
Because
representation.
now that there's free websites like to
Free.
like get rid of backgrounds and like all the tools, that's
Yeah.
really easy to do compared to years ago.
Yes.
No
Yeah.
excuses anymore.
Right. Okay. So now that we know sort of the different types of AAC symbols, we want to talk about some specific strategies for completing a symbol assessment. First, you want to identify a range of concepts that are relevant and meaningful to the person with complex communication needs. So if I know that someone is really likes and is motivated by work, I'm going to select I'm going to choose work as a concept to test different representations or different symbol representations. So I'm going to select symbols to represent each concept based on the anticipated skills of the person with complex communication needs. So if work is my target, maybe I'm looking at digital photos of the work, and this is like the actual person doing like at their job. I could use the line drawing that just pops up on any given AAC software, or like potentially traditional orthography, depending on the person's literacy skills. I'm going to teach each symbol by pairing it with its referent or labeling it. Okay. And then oops, I just got like a weird. All right, just a funny little, am I matching? No, I am. Okay. So there are a couple of ways to do, once I've got a number of concepts that I think the person will understand, and I want to be really sure that I'm not just testing nouns, because those are like, that I have symbols to represent verbs and adjectives even, so that I have a good idea of what representations are appropriate. I'm going to present 2 to 3 symbols and say, if I take a receptive language task, for example, I'm going to present 2 to 3 symbols and say, show me work. And here I have a symbol representing work, one just kind of like a family at home, and then this person at an art class. A correct response indicates that the person with complex communication needs understands instructions, including spoken words and vocabulary, and the symbol representing the vocabulary. So if I say, show me work, and they can do it from this field of 3, then I'm like, okay, they get that representation of work. I can change the type of symbol. So again, show me draw. And I selected write and draw on purpose because these are very, very similar. And we want to make sure that a person who maybe isn't reading the words that are sometimes captioning these symbols really can understand and use them. So we can use yes/no tasks. So that's when you present one symbol and just ask, like, is this chocolate milk? Just note that sometimes we assume that yes and no are simple concepts, and they are not. From a functional perspective, yes and no might have different meanings across situations. So their meaning depends on the preceding question. For example, is this chocolate milk? Yes. Isn't this chocolate milk? No. And do you want chocolate milk? Maybe later, right? So we want to be sure that we've got these yes/no tasks, like that we are sure that someone is understanding yes and no, and that we're not confusing that yes and no with accept or reject too. So be careful. Another type of symbol assessment task would be visual matching. Here you're just giving those same, not same, but also 2 to 3 symbols with the referent and say match it. Here we have an apple with digital photos of different fruits, an apple, strawberry, watermelon. We could try that out with line drawings and see, like, are they flexible enough to recognize this line drawing picture of an apple as an apple and differentiate it from something really close, like a strawberry. And I just think these are important to talk about. When they're all just in a square, they look like they're the same size. And obviously we know that apples, strawberries, and watermelons are very different. So you lose that proportion when you use those line drawings or any type of symbol in a grid. You want to make sure that the person is flexible enough to recognize, again, a red apple when green is the one they're looking for. And then same thing with the line drawings, just as examples. You want to be sure that the person is recognizing the symbols and their reference as representations of their reference. Yeah.
No, I was just say that this kind of seems basic, and well, of course, but this really doesn't happen in AAC assessments. Is what we're finding, just because there's so many things that are readily available. Often people, again, just grab off the shelf and make an assumption and have this huge learning burden and learning curve, where if we just took a little time and did this first, then we would know and could set up the system to match that skill level, as opposed to using the communication opportunities as a way to teach a skill they don't have yet.
Right.
We really want the AAC system to match where they are now so that they can communicate with it.
Yeah.
Not as like a teaching tool.
Yeah, and I see that it's Erin. Erin has her hand.
I did raise my hand because we got a good question in the Q&A that I think is relevant to what you guys are talking about. So somebody asked, can you direct me to some research that I can refer a speech therapist to if or when I receive pushback on switching from pictures over icons, the debate of, pictures over icons. The person said they've had several therapists who had a more traditional approach that resisted customization, saying they'd learn the icons eventually. And they said they'd love some research from sources that they respect and value to build that collaboration and be able to talk about what might be best in that case as far as the assessment.
Yeah, I think there are some in my references. I'm thinking about like specific studies that identify specifically children, people with ASD, people with developmental disabilities who generally do better with digital photos. So yes, if you like send me an email, or I don't know how to get.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I
Julie, if
know.
you can send me some resources, what we'll do is we can add them, we can send them out with the Zoom information potentially. I also can put them on our website. So where we're recording this, it'll be asynchronous, available in about a week. But we can add some attachments to it with some of the information that you guys, some of the resources. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Great. And yeah, and I would say too, like, it's I wouldn't say like non-customizing is a traditional, like it should always be customized. So just not
Yeah.
just the symbol, but the whole system.
Yeah. Personalization is
Yeah.
maybe, I hear what you're saying as
Yeah.
far as some pushback. A lot of SLPs, there's a big talk in our field about the fact that many SLPs are going to like a systems approach where they just pick a system and they're not actually individualizing the assessment or personalizing the device once they get it. And
Right.
so
Yeah,
that's a
and
huge issue.
an additional issue on that is that what we know is that SLPs tend to pick the device they like the best, and it's like everybody gets a device.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah.
yeah, that's
You
great.
raise a huge issue.
Yes.
Yeah. You're not alone in that pushback.
You are not.
Well, thank you. We'll get some resources up on the
Excellent.
website for that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one reason why we're taking the time to go through some of this tonight is to talk, to kind of remind everybody, all professions,
Yeah.
what really needs to be involved in
Yeah.
these decisions.
Totally. Okay, so with visual matching, and again, sometimes I kind of lose my like advanced clicker.
Yeah.
So you can take a question answer tasks can get you to this information about symbols. Provide some symbols and ask a question about something in the environment. So if you're watching, I don't know in what situation, like if you're watching somebody build a deck, you can say,
Plenty of
what's
reality
he
shows.
doing? Yeah, lots of reality shows for that. What's he doing? And give them a set of line drawings and see, can they understand and use these symbols to answer that question? So of course it would be the one on the right. Requesting tasks. So what do you want? That can be with the apple, the donut, as representations. And just an important note about literacy. Traditional orthography, which would be letters, words, sentences, offers access to text-based AAC systems, and with that unlimited generative capacity. If you can spell, then you don't need to do symbols. You can just, well, they are symbols, but you don't need to go through these line drawings and pictures. You can just type what you want to say. And unfortunately, many people with complex communication needs never develop functional literacy skills. And there's overwhelming evidence that people with CCN can learn to read and write, but they have to receive effective literacy instruction.
And explicit instruction.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. And so before you move on, make sure that you do check literacy skills, because many students, especially adults who maybe like went through the schools before some of this research was available, wouldn't have received it. So we're going to do a literacy assessment to determine someone's access to text-based systems. Letter sound correspondence would just be like, point to the letter that says and see if they can do it from a field of 4 letters, and then like kind of work your way through the alphabet, focusing on the sounds and not the names of the letters. You might ask them to decode a word. These words are all minimally paired, so to get the right answer here, someone would have to be able to recognize all of the sounds in this word, bug, and differentiate it from big and rug and bun and bug. So you can test decoding skills. And then you can also assess sight word recognition. So this is really simple. You just write or print the words and you say, point to the word that says Mike and see if they can differentiate with, really familiar words.
I really think this is a key part to your point that many people haven't received that explicit instruction necessary. that this has become just a typical component of all of our AAC intervention, that
Mhm.
regardless of how they do on this little kind of assessment, we always introduce these goals. And I have just been amazed at the
Yes.
individuals who are older.
Especially recently.
Yeah, that once they're actually given some explicit instruction, how quickly they start picking up on
Right.
this, and then it becomes a vital part of their AAC system. So regardless of their age, we really do encourage you to look at some basic literacy instruction in that was specifically made for individuals who don't have the speech, right? Because so many times we're looking for the individual to say, and which may not be
Right.
the option. So we need to make sure we're flipping it in the way that Julia had. Yeah.
Point to not what does the sound say?
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah. Me too. I've also been amazed by what some
Mhm.
people who have never read.
Never been
Turns
given the
out when you
opportunity.
teach people how to read, they can read.
Yeah,
It's kind of
amazing what happens when you teach it.
right. It's worth spending some time on.
Mhm.
So then once you've determined the symbols that the person can understand and use, you really have to think about how you're going to organize those symbols in a system. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about cognitive organization. Some people call it symbol organization, but these are used to determine the appropriate organization of symbols within aided systems. And I like to think about how those emojis are organized on your phone. And there's always one that you can't find and you wish was somewhere else. And that is cognitive organization. And we want to make, in the same way that we want to pick symbols that are easy for someone to understand and use, we want to put them in places that's easy to find so that it's accessible and for language.
Yeah, just a real quick example as you're
Yes,
switching. I was told about an individual who had an obsession with the calendar.
Yes.
And in their mind, they kind of categorized individuals they met and activities they were doing by the month that they occurred or the month of that person's birthday. And so, instead of having a people page like we all would want to have,
It'd be like
it
a
was
January page.
Right.
Yeah.
And that January page then led to all the people that the person knew that had birthdays in January. And that was
as
the
well
way
as the mittens and the weather, and the snow and the
Yeah.
shovels and all the things that go with.
So who would have
January.
thought? But when you take the time to individualize, and the person was able to readily use that
Yeah.
system, unlike traditional organized systems they
Right.
had struggled with. So
Yeah.
it's
It's a great story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, people with complex communication needs, and especially adults with ASD, might organize symbols differently depending on language and cognition or their personal preference. And again, just think about how your symbols are organized on your phone and you'll be like, oh, I get it. This is like, some of these AAC systems really are weird, right? So, so traditional grid displays organize symbols in rows and columns. Symbols might include digital photographs, line drawings, traditional orthography, or some mix, which we see here. And we can have a number of different types of organizations. So taxonomic organizations are by category. Schematic organizations organize symbols by context. Semantic syntactic organizations are by word order. So you might see like nouns, verbs, and like almost to build the
like
sentence.
subject, verb, object kind of thing.
Interestingly, moving left to right, which would be relevant for someone who reads.
Right.
But maybe a little harder for
But
someone
not
who
for
doesn't.
everyone.
Yeah. Alphabetic organization is by alphabet. And then you have those idiosyncratic organizations like by calendar, right? So we'll have Apple in our mind here. And a taxonomic organization will have apple organized with other fruit. So this is like the category is fruit, and this apple is organized here. And it's not just by a category, it's actually within the category, it's organized alphabetically.
Right. Which goes against the research, right?
Sure.
Because research tells us that if you put like internal color objects together, you actually decrease the visual attention demands and people can find the symbols faster. So if in one corner you had all the red things, another corner you had all the green things. And this is for like most traditional people. It doesn't apply to like individuals with cortical visual impairment, for example. But so even this may not be, the best thing is the way we see them in systems today.
Yeah. Erin's got a hand raised here.
Yeah, another question in through the Q&A that I wanted to post to you guys, talking about the literacy information. They said, this is so interesting and important. Are there resources for explicit literacy instruction for learners with complex communication needs and without a history of teaching in literacy? thinking of adults with ID, DD, ASD who exhibit no literacy skills.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you can.
Well, the AAC
Yeah.
learning space.
Yeah, that's probably where I can.
Yeah.
So Penn State in over many years has created a system called the ALL.
Accessible literacy learning curriculum.
Yeah, for everyone, people with developmental disabilities and such. And that's kind of the premise that we use. And if you go to the AAC Learning Center, which is a website, there's actually a module about that, but the all curriculum is kind of all spelled out there. There's some research on it, and you can actually buy the entire curriculum set. But or you can kind of take that module and then build your own, whatever. I'm not encouraging anyone or not trying to promote anything. And I don't get kickback even if we did, but it's what we use as the foundation for everything we do here. And we've seen great results.
Yeah.
And the research shows that it's effective.
Yeah, it's yeah. So
Across ages, across diagnoses, across ability levels.
Yeah. Great question. And we're so happy to share that information because we've seen it work so well for such a range of people. So if we jump back to our organization, when we are putting apples with other fruits, that's a taxonomic organization. And we've of course seen AAC systems that come out of the box like this. A schematic organization, I'm sorry, I've got lots of pings happening on my computer, but a schematic organization organizes everything by context. So instead of having all of the fruit, I might have apple organized on my baking a pie with grandma page. And in this page, I have everything I might need to talk about, make, mix,
Ask questions, all those
questions, all the things. So this would be a schematic organization. And again, this can be really supportive for someone who's learning, for example, two-word combinations, because it reduces the cognitive demands of navigating, and also supports language learning in context. We know that when people learn language, they do it in context. If I understand apple in the context of baking apple pie, then this layout is really going to help me. And I don't have to think about the subordinate category and then all the verbs that might go with like add apples and add apples bowl, right? Like that I would need to navigate otherwise. So this can be a game changer for people using traditional grid displays, especially with ASD.
Yeah, I really like the schematic organizations too, when we're in a context that is like a high stress for an individual. So they may be very capable of doing something well beyond or even using their natural speech, like in most situations, but in certain contexts where their sensory needs are high or something else is happening, high stress for whatever reason, giving them a schematic organization for that event can be really, really useful too. So it's not always like a one size fits all, or this is how everything is going to look across all things.
Right.
So again, it's that individualization.
Yeah. Yeah. We call these topic boards often. So it's kind of just setting up like the one context. Great. So we can take schematic organizations and break the traditional grid display and use a visual scene display instead. And so visual scene displays, or VSDs, are pictures or photographs that organize symbols into specific contexts. And rather than having those small squares, you preserve
the greater context.
Yeah, bigger context. And people will select hotspots within the VSD to communicate. So this is a picture of a small business owned by a person with ASD. And so you could, for example, select the baked goods in the person on the left's hands to communicate items on the menu, and select pictures of the owner to communicate information about his business. And VSDs provide context for communication by laying language into the events and environments in which they actually occur. So here, the cookie is the right size for the person, and you don't have like a person-sized cookie or a cookie-sized person, I guess. So there's a lot of context to support the person's understanding of the symbol and their use.
Yeah, because that's the hard thing about traditional displays is, is that it takes away every bit of context. And like you said, size, orientation, and all of those things kind of disappear. And so some individuals really will benefit from this. And again, this might be a spot where you use it for some things, but not for all things.
Exactly. Yeah. Whoops, I changed on mine. Okay. Video VSDs combine the participation supports of video prompting with the communication supports of visual scene displays. So VSDs can actually be placed within a video, within a recorded YouTube video, for example, and the video plays and then pauses to provide opportunities to communicate. So I work with an adult with ASD who just loves
He's a beginning communicator.
So he's really early symbolic communicator, and traditional grid displays were really difficult for him, but he just loves Bert and Ernie and the Rubber Ducky song. Rather than having him just watch that video alone and without interacting, we've built it into a video VSD app. It pauses when there's this opportunity, and the you make noise part is like a social game with his family. So, you know, when I squeeze you, you make noise. Like it says,
Yeah.
when I squeeze you, he presses you make noise, and then there's like a tickle thing that happens. And so,
So yeah, that social closeness, and it's
Yes.
just really important to his family to have that, interaction and that piece going there.
Right.
It's something you wouldn't get otherwise.
totally, yeah. Okay. So research demonstrates that video VSDs can help increase engagement, turn-taking, social interaction during preferred videos for students with ASD. When we use these, we start to see people not just looking at that video, but also looking up for the
Regard.
eye gaze, and we start to shape that eye gaze and symbolic
Or just
communication.
general regard, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love to use these in like sync with a lot of my clients,
Yes.
alongside different grids and things that have
Mhm.
other language opportunities to kind of work on these skills specifically.
Yeah. Yep. And they can be effective for learning new skills and communicating in those contexts as well. So Babb et al. Used video VSDs to support independent completion of vocational activities and communication for a young man with ASD and complex communication needs. And now this picture is just one that I was using, where a grad student modeled volunteering at a Meals on Wheels. And when when the video played and it paused at important steps, and it would just kind of remind the person, count stacks of 10, which he could use to say, I need to count stacks of 10. He could also use it to prompt himself to complete that step of the task.
Yeah, and actually, Selena Babb is going to be one of our presenters in 2025. So in the second half of our series here, she actually does a whole presentation on the use of video VSDs for work and things like that.
Great.
In community activities.
Yeah, definitely don't miss that. Okay, so then here we are in this last section. And I hope I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. The last things we need to do is really assess communication partner supports and environmental barriers to communication. The participation model identifies two types of barriers. Access barriers are related to factors that are intrinsic to the person with complex communication needs. Opportunities barriers are imposed by people other than the person with CCN. And there are some specific strategies for doing this. First, interviews to the extent possible, interview the person with CCN, and you can ask, what does Dawn do that makes it really easy to communicate? Or what does she do that makes it kind of hard for you? And then interview the communication partners as well. Do systematic observations of the interactions between the person with CCN and their communication partners, but pivot to the partner. And look for strategies that are supporting communication, like providing wait time, responding to communicative attempts, asking open-ended questions, and modeling the use of an AAC system, offering choices, and then also the behaviors that might limit communication. From there, you're actually looking at decision-making. Feature matching is collaborative. No, you're good. And you're going to conduct trials of AAC options that meet the needs and abilities of the person based on all of this information that you've gathered.
And this is that critical piece that goes away from system, right? System focused evaluation. So you're actually looking at, now that you have all of this, which systems might support all of that information that you've just gathered the best.
Yeah, if you discover in your assessment that this person has a really hard time understanding symbols, or they're just learning to understand symbols, then you probably want to steer away from the traditional grid displays.
or some of the more like built out robust ones. Yeah.
Yes. You want to provide during a trial, you want to provide instruction and opportunities for practice, collect data, and ask for feedback from the team, including the person with CCN.
And that data should go around those like needs and priorities, as well as some of those other things that we already went through with the systematic observation to see how it's changed now that this system is in place and the various features of that system.
Right, right. You're going to select and customize an AAC system, and often systems. So I just want to point out that someone's AAC system might include those light tech visual schedules as well as a high tech system. And then as for light and high tech communication, you're going to select vocabulary symbols to represent it. Then you're going to organize it based on the results of your evaluation. For unaided communication, you might make a dictionary or some kind of communication passport so that unfamiliar listeners or unfamiliar partners can recognize the meaning of specific facial expressions, body language, gestures, and or signs. So there's like the systems and for the aided systems, but you might also find that there's unaided communication. So just like knowing that, for example, when I flop on the couch, I'm asking for like that back rub that's like when you make a pizza on my back or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be really important to give. You can even like take pictures of this and almost make a dictionary.
Like a dictionary, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's really, really helpful for our folks that are intentional but not yet symbolic.
Totally.
So that new people can quickly understand. And yeah.
Sometimes we do this with a video and we
Mhm.
just record ourselves on an empty Zoom and we play the video and we talk about it, and sometimes have like a little checklist and a PowerPoint just to make that like get a new support
up and running.
aid up and running. So like, here, watch this video. This is what I need to go to the bathroom looks like, or watch this video. This is what it looks like when I'm wanting to go out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like go to the park or something. So next we're talking about AAC intervention here. And of course we want to teach the person with CCN how to use the AAC system. No one like just gets a basketball and turns into LeBron James, and we don't want to have that kind of expectation for people with ASD. So what we'll do is we'll provide augmented input to support comprehension. So when I talk to the person, I'm going to also model the use of the system as I do it. It works because it provides visual support, and because visual supports are permanent, augmented input also provides people with ASD more processing time. So imagine I'm saying it and typing it with my pictures, and then the pictures remain on the screen. That gives them something to hang on to once the speech is come and gone. We're going to provide focus stimulation, which just means frequent, highly concentrated models of target vocabulary within activities. So thinking back on that baking pie page, I might say like, oh, you're gonna cut the apples, you're cutting apples. And you're just gonna say it a couple of times while you model the use of the system. And then you can also provide systematic, organized, and direct instruction using a most to least prompting hierarchy. So you can be like, oh man, when I want this word, I can do this to get to it. Okay. Teach partners how to support communication too by providing wait time, recognizing and respond to communicative attempts, asking open-ended questions, modeling the use of the system, and of course, offering choices. An effective AAC assessment and intervention will improve outcomes for adults with ASD and complex communication needs. So we'll encourage you to find your team and get started.
Yeah. And all that time that you've put into that will be less time of frustration and burden on the learner with it. So don't be afraid to spend the time.
Yeah. Now I don't know, Erin, if we have time for questions.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes.
10 minutes.
We have about 10 minutes. You guys did good with timing. Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you for all of the information that you provided, and yeah, invite people to add in your questions before we wrap up here, and we'll read them out loud. I was just thinking about how great an idea. It's so simple when you were just mentioning, you know, when you have learners that are intentional but not symbolic yet, doing the videos. You know, we've been interested in like just-in-time training, which is kind of what you're doing, right? You're just coming these little clip videos that only take a couple minutes, but really go a long way to show what the person's communicating. And I feel like that for communication partners is also huge then when you do want to shift to a device. Because they get the connection of like, oh, this flop isn't just somebody flopping, right? This flop is communication.
Yeah, and we've just found by organizing that and assisting our families to organize that information and like sending them off with that, then they go to a new community event, they're trying something new, like a bowling league. You know, somebody will watch a video that's a few minutes long to like understand, you know, certain things that they need or whatever, and it can be referred back to and all of that. And so it's just a nice thing for families to have, to be able to, you know, put out to anyone regardless of where they're going.
Yeah, and those like videos aren't limited to just, oh, how to recognize the non-symbolic communication. It can also be like,
This is how to do choice making.
when you do choices, make sure that you've got them up high and you're looking for the person's eyes. Maybe they'll select with their hands, but they might also just look a little longer at one of them, and you can accept that as a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
We know that's not high tech, but it's definitely useful.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, some of what I got is from what you guys presented is we really, you have to meet the learner where they are, and kind of bring them along. So sometimes that is low tech, or it's what you got in the moment, but it's still communication.
And it could be a mashup of all of it, you know.
I would say most of the people, I'd say most people using AAC are using so many modes of communication that include aided and unaided, high tech and light tech.
Which is really typical because you and I do the same thing. You know, we're using all kinds of modes of communication at all times to get whatever communicative we need. So we need to afford them that same thing that we have, and not assume that everything is going to come through one mode.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I do have a question here. Somebody said, I love the idea of video communication dictionaries. Do you have a model or example for reference? I want to start making these or a guidebook. What do you got?
Well, very soon there'll be an actual app out to support this that you can, it's like the structure, and you can plug in your own videos and your own like comments and things, so that you could easily just push it out to whomever needs that training. That's one of the projects that RERC on AAC is coming out with very shortly. Yeah, you might, I don't know, did we put our emails on here? Because
I can add them to the website.
Yeah.
Or where would it be best for them to be checking back for kind of the launch of that, or when it might be available?
On the Penn State RERC on AAC website is probably the best place, but we're also doing some recruiting, is why I said that. So if somebody's really, really hot and heavy on that, but we've just even done it on PowerPoint. And so, you know, maybe there is something we could post. Or
I could make a model one where I mean, it's really simple. I just make a PowerPoint, and like when you're working with, Teddy, you're going to provide a choice of two, here's how you do choices. You can do it with symbols, and then I show a video of what that looks like, and then you can do it with two choices of a shirt, right? And I just kind of provide a couple of examples, come back to my little checklist of how to, and then I'm like, now you know how to do it. So it's actually not really high tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put some, I'll get some resources from you guys, and we will add either some links to the website. So where their presentation is under the recorded, it'll be under the recorded website, recorded trainings. Once that's up, we'll add a couple links to some of the references and some of the information, and the RERC where they can keep an eye out for things.
Yeah,
I had another question. I've had so much more success when the AAC program is customized to their needs, but the setup and ongoing needs is time intensive and requires a lot of upkeep as their skills grow. What have you done to train families to take the lead in that development to allow ongoing updates outside of sessions?
Oh, isn't that important? Like always, I always try to identify one person in that team, and that team, not necessarily meaning professionals, right? Just in their community, that is kind of maybe a little bit more tech savvy or isn't afraid of it. I don't know, my experience, it's even been like the brother in California that, you know, just feels like they can't do anything to help because he's so far away, but he took the lead in, you know, doing that and pushing updates that way. So I think the first step is to identify that one person that, and it may just be one, you know, if you can, that is willing to, you know, not afraid of it would be the first step.
Yeah, and the not afraid of it thing is you sort of have to give permission. Like you have to say, like, you can't break it. Like I can fix anything that you break, right? So go for it. Like it's way better. We'll spend time in therapy co-constructing the visual scene displays, brainstorm. Maybe it's just brainstorming the vocabulary for the communicative context for like a schematically organized page. I sometimes even call them like, let's think about our next communication station. Like, you know, like what other activities we try to identify priorities and then kind of build the vocabulary together. And then I'm like, so now you click here. Like I just pull them right in and I'm like, all right, now click on this, click add, click this, search the, you know.
And
I
that's
just
another
start
great
talking
thing
them
to
through
make a
it.
quick video, even though you're like, you could send them to such and such manufacturer website for it. They respond so much better when I just take a quick video, like on my phone of myself, like, okay, touch here, touch here, touch here. And I text it
Like
to them.
over her shoulder.
Yeah, like,
sometimes.
you know, just bam, 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 and send them something. The other thing I found that's really helpful is like, what's important to them?
Yeah.
Like meaning the partner you're trying to train, like they really want the person to communicate at this activity. So like getting the buy-in of them creating that thing that they're highly motivated by tends to help them then buy into the larger process that you're looking for. But to your point, it is extremely time intensive. But also
There's
to your
no way around
point, you
that.
see the success when you take the time to do that. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, you can spin your wheels and not get very
As
many.
far.
Yeah.
So I think as they have the success, you get the buy-in and then they're more willing to try.
More
Yeah,
willing
it's just kind of
programmers with
like,
that.
yeah.
But there is there's a high price for entry, I guess. Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. Dawn and Julia, I'm wondering what advice you'd give to a behavior analyst, and I know we have a few here, in terms of approaching that SLP in a collaborative way to be part and contribute to the kind of assessments you're talking about. I'll be blunt. I don't think the default right now is sort of that collaboration. That's why we're doing this.
Right. I know. I totally.
So how do we break the barriers in the sense, you know,
So
from the SLP's perspective, what would you want to say to behavior analysts in terms of how to be a meaningful contributor to the kind of assessments you're talking about?
yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, just addressing the need, like, hey, I'm seeing these, you know, these forms of communication, and I think that they could be better or supported. First of all, I think this person needs some support, right? And getting them on board with that. And then maybe what I found in the use of this checklist is that because the checklist was sort of the
neutral thing,
the neutral
yeah.
thing, you use the checklist and you're like, hey, I'm trying to like figure out I'm trying to determine some AAC strategies systems and strategies that are gonna work. Could you help me work through this checklist? And now it's not you saying like, I need a receptive language assessment. You're like, well, the checklist says I need an assessment. And so and that's not just this AAC assessment checklist. It's like, in surgery, for example, like when a charge nurse has that surgical safety checklist and it's like, no, we need to make sure that we have enough blood on hand. Like this, there's no denying that. Like
Right.
it's
It's
a
on the
rule.
checklist. There's no hierarchy there. It's just a rule.
It empowers the person to ask for what they need. And so, I recommend using this checklist, and it's free and available. It's published in the AAC textbook, and we can always float a PDF of it too. But this checklist in general, empower, in the same way that it empowers the co-pilot to be like, hey, it's time to land the plane. You can do that here. And I would say just rely on it.
And I think
using the tool, because there's definitely things on the checklist that I feel like as a BCBA, you'd be looking at, you'd be observing, you'd be collecting some data on. So to say like, I've been using this to get some of these pieces, help me get some of these other pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. But we can't deny it can be very hard, and people can be very territorial across all professions. It's not just a SLP BCBA thing, but it's definitely something we have to break down with more of that teaming approach and, interprofessional collaboration and, attitudes can be difficult, and I don't think we have a solution for that at all. But I do agree that, coming at it like, hey, there's this checklist and I was just interested, and, what are your thoughts here? And, and there's no reason why you can't try some of these things on your own. It's not like it's territorial in the sense of, you can't make a little symbol board while you're doing like an activity and just see what happens, because sometimes the proof is in the pudding. And if you try something and you see a huge difference and you happen to be snapping a video during that, like I went to this session and I did this checklist in my brain and I thought I'd try this, and wow, like he can learn letters. Maybe we should do this or whatever. So I think, kind of innocently stumbling upon something that works that's such a bad idea either. So, if you can't get the cooperation, I feel like, going ahead and persevering with some of the things that we're trying here can't hurt to go, alongside, right? And I tend to go, when a team has something in place that I don't necessarily agree with, I don't think is the most effective, I tend to just say, hey, let's add this. I don't ever tell them like, this is bad, or I don't think this is great, or this isn't evidence-based, or I don't negate anything they're doing. I just say, hey, can we also add in this? And if I'm right and it starts working well, then the other thing kind of naturally starts to go away. So that's the other thing that I would suggest.
It seems that one of the reoccurring themes is sort of those basics: individualization and what's effective for the individual. And so I think, as we come together as two different disciplines, if that is the primary the determination of success, what is effective, and then ultimately something that's individualized, I think that helps pave a road for meaningful collaboration.
I'll add one thing to that. I think defining what progress is supposed to look like, because some people will say it's working when it's really not, or it's only working this much. Often they may be able to do something that's highly motivating and meaningful on that really extensive system, but they can't communicate.
Something like labeling things.
Yeah.
Or something. You're like,
but they're not adding to the vocabulary on a regular basis. They're not adding to things. And so I think that also defining like, what are we going to call progress? Because anyone that we're working with should be developing more and more vocabulary and language skills and complexity.
And if you circle back on your communication needs assessment, do you have more communication needs met than you did at the beginning? So if you circle back, like these needs were unmet, are they now met?
That's your progress indicator. You've made these priorities. It's not happening. We need to adjust.
Well, great. Well, we can stay open here for a little bit longer if other people have questions. I did get a couple here's, or we've done that before in the Q&A as well. So I think everybody appreciated your presentation and this great discussion tonight. But I will close the discussion, the webinar officially for people who need to get off, since we're just a little past 8:30. But we can hang on just for another minute or two. Julia and Dawn can, in case there's any other questions that come up. But otherwise, thank you very much. Again, please go to our website. It has all the information there on how to obtain CEUs. And if you have any difficulty, please send us an email through the email that's listed there. And
this is our first time, so like be patient. If something's not working, we'll be more than happy to fix it and attend to whatever problems you might have. But since this is the first live webinar in the CEU system, just be a little patient with us in case there are any problems.
Yes, and come back next month. We're going to be doing a live webinar in October and November. We'll be skipping December, but then January through May, we'll have a live webinar every month, and that schedule will be coming out very soon. But we do have October and November scheduled, so sign up now to join them. We'll be having more fantastic discussions about AAC.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.